Hello, everyone from sunny Toronto. Here to talk today about change management again, which is the challenge. And today, maybe try to imagine what the future could be like. And so, as I talked about in the past, that one of the biggest challenges that AI will run into is the human backlash. Um, from adopting technology. We know that adopting technology can be very difficult for any kind of technology, but especially if technology starts to automate some jobs and we know that the people who do those jobs will feel threatened and concerned that they may lose their jobs, right? And I think this backlash as AI begins to really be adopted by companies will start to run into this human change challenge. And a lot of the people involved in these jobs that are impacted may react fearfully, of course, as we talked about being empathetic into that situation that, the people, are going to be afraid and may not want to use the technology. So today, hopefully I can share some ideas on how we could collaborate. We don't want the technologists to be so dystopian and come in and say we can completely automate the processes. I think it's how can we collaborate um, to create a change path forward. And so I want to talk today about maybe three areas that I believe are going to be required to be discussed in more detail. The three general areas of change. One would be there's going to be change to the business processes. So if you think of using AI to help, for in our case, I'll talk about Daisy examples. So if we're talking about retail merchandise planning, and the Daisy technology will helps our clients decide what items they should promote in a promotion, be that in a grocery flyer or on an e-commerce website, or maybe products that you send via your mobile apps to consumers. So choosing which products to promote. Today, that job is done by human beings who are, category managers or merchandise planners, that task of deciding what product to promote in a specific week. And I guess there could be two elements to that. It could be planned annually when they talk to brands like, Kraft or P&G or Johnson and Johnson and talk to the vendors and say, let's plan our funding together and say which weeks do you want to fund promotions. And then it comes down to a specific week, like I may be planning today for a month or 2 months from now and deciding what product am I going to put on the front page of the flyer. And so now what Daisy's technology does, rather than the human being whose job in the past it was to do this, to come up with the item. So literally every week someone has to decide, well, this week I'm going to put Kellogg's cereal in the leaflet or the flyer, and then next week I'm going to put Nabisco crackers, and then the week after that I'm going to put Kraft cheddar cheese, and then the week after that I may go back to children's cereal. And so somebody literally has to come up with these product ideas, which could be driven partly by contractual agreements with the brands, as I talked about. But in general, somebody literally has to decide. And if you think of a paper grocery flyer that could have, 200 items in it, divided amongst all the planners, somebody literally picks what goes in every slot in the flyer. And literally, if you think of in store, when you walk into any store, you see all the signage on the stores and price tags on the shelves. People decide, what some of those promotions are. Now, certainly technology, even today, without AI, is used to help maybe set some of those prices. There's some simple pricing tools and things like that that can help set some of those. But a human being generally will decide on every one of those things. So in any given week, there's got to be several thousand items and prices that need to be decided upon. And so now, and there's a whole group of people. Any company could have anywhere from a small retailer might have 10 planners to a large company might have 1,000 planners who are making these decisions today. And a large company, 1,000 planners could be because you have several hundred stores that are in different regions of the country, and different regions of the country would have different plans. So you have different planning teams for all these regions or divisions. So, so large human tasks. So now you're going to use technology to, instead of the human being coming up with the idea of I'm going to put cornflakes on the front page of the flyer. Now the technology is going to make a recommendation and say, no, we should put Cheerios on the flyer instead of cornflakes. So the technology comes in, and now the human being doesn't have to come up with the idea. Their job is now to review. So that's going to be a change to the process, right? So now if you're thinking of the human beings are planning the tasks, their task would be to okay, review the contracts. Are there brands that have paid for certain slots in certain weeks? Then they would say, okay, I'm going to review the historical sales data to see which products, I'm the category manager responsible for cereal. I'm going to look historically and say which cereals have done well at this time of the year. How did last year's promotion work? I might look at what did we just promote in the last 2, 3 weeks. I might see, I don't want to be repetitive, so I might want to promote something different. So there's a number of tasks of checking the past, doing some analysis, and then coming up with an idea as to what should I do this week, and then maybe deciding what the price might be, what the forecast might be. So deciding the attribute, should it be a discount, should it be a buy one get one free, should it be a loyalty? If I have a loyalty program, should there be a points reward? So all of these decisions need to be made. So you'd think that there's now analysis, planning, assessment, and then all of that takes time. So somebody might take, for simple ideas, let's say one cereal, let's say that takes 1 unit of time to come up with one item and plan all the elements, offer type, placement in the ad, choosing the specific item, all of that. And so now if a technology comes along and recommends that, it recommends the price, recommends the offer type, recommends the placement. Now the human being doesn't have to do all those tasks. So that's a change to the process. So what will the process look like? Does the human being need to do all that review, maybe to evaluate the recommendation if the AI is making a recommendation? Now, how does the human being interact with that? Are they just reviewing it and taking at face value, what the AI is doing? Or if the AI comes with an explanation, will the AI have done all the assessment that, it's been 2 weeks since the last promo. We did this last year at this time. It worked very well. There's no vendor funding involved here at this moment in time. So the AI can come with an explanation of all those things. So first of all, you got to decide what's the AI's capabilities versus the person's task. You got to divide those tasks up as to who's doing what. And if the AI is going to come up with a full plan and take over a lot of these historical assessment and analysis activities, then the human being now becomes a reviewer, and they will be reviewing what the AI is doing. And so now that's a whole process change there, right? So imagining what that process looks like, from listing all the tasks that used to be done, now dividing those tasks. What does the person do? What does the technology do? Again, which depends on the technology's capabilities. And then ultimately, is the human just a reviewer and an approver, or are they doing any of these other tasks? So you got to lay out that process to decide what does that look like. And then the technology. Now, if the human, once you've now come up with that plan, let's say the technology does it all and the human being just comes in, now they're the reviewer and approver, and they could review and they would have to say, is it possible? Because there could be exceptions, there could be last minute things that the AI doesn't know about. The AI is not omniscient. There's certain data sources that it has available that it could make an assessment and make its recommendation on. But there could be, one of the vendors might have had a manufacturing challenge or something. One of their factories might have had a machinery break and they're not able to manufacture as much of the product that week, or there could be a strike, or it could be some distribution challenge of shipping the product. There could be many challenges that get in the way of getting the product. There could be a different vendor comes in and said, I have some last minute funding. I want to buy a slot for my promotion. So there could be these exceptions. So the human being becomes an exception handler in that case when when the person has access to the information that the technology doesn't, and then they can do that exception decision, or they could simply review the promotion from the AI, make sure that in aggregate all of the recommendations of the AI are making the plan. If I'm the cereal category manager, do all the cereal recommendations on my grocery flyer, on my in-store items, on my website, on my any other direct mail or direct mobile app promotions, does all of that in aggregate meet my business objective, right? So that's what the human being, they review it, and they might make a few changes here and there if they're thinking, okay, well, we have excess inventory in a product, so I think we need to get rid of that. This product is going to go bad if we don't get rid of it. So they may make some changes like that. based on those exceptions, vendor funding, supply challenges, or excess inventory. And then, okay, I review and approve the plan and then execute. So all of that I've talked about there is now kind of a business process change, as well as intermingled into that was the job role change. What are the tasks that the person does versus tasks that the technology does? So that's part of the job role change. Now, if we're taking some of the tasks away from the person and giving it to the technology, that would be part of the job role change. And part of the process change is now maybe I've collapsed some time because the technology can do this quickly. What used to take a person, maybe, as I said, one time unit to do, maybe that's a week of planning activity. If the technology can do that in 1 minute, what is now, how can we, that now changes the process, that maybe I can plan closer to when the promotion happens, or I can create extra time to to do other things. I may call, likely planning closer to the promotion is better because you have more recent data, more accurate forecasts are more accurate, everything is more accurate. So that's the process change. So we can now imagine, looking at the context of one person, how does the process change? Now imagine you have 100 planners. What's the impact of changing the job role of 100 planners? Is the planning activity for that serial category manager, is that going to be different than the planning for somebody who's planning lawn furniture, right? Lawn furniture could have a very different characteristics because, to get the lawn furniture, if it's made in China, I might have to order that a whole year in advance, comes over on a ship, right? So now you see the complexities in when we consider an aggregate, what's the impact of the aggregate of all these changes? And so that's a big task, is imagining what that business process now will look like if technology is taking over some of what the human tasks were, and looking at each task or each group of similar planners. Maybe we plan this in groups of similar planners, the ones that have really long lead times because you have to procure it from overseas and ship it. That could be one process that gets changed. Some of the planning that's for things that are planned 8 to 12 weeks out, maybe things like those consumer packaged goods, has one set of planning processes. And then things like fresh items, because you're not going to necessarily plan fruits and vegetables and meat and fresh items like 2 or 3 months in advance, because they have availability, and they have the farm availability. When does that produce become ripe and available? Weather and things impact that. So typically fresh things are planned much closer, 2-3 weeks out from the availability date. So now you have different processes for different types of products. And so that's the first step, is re-engineering and reimagining all of that. And I think, part of that includes looking at what is the capabilities of the technology. Do we trust the technology? Do we phase that in? Do we let the technology do a little thing first and then take more and more as we get confident, or we do it in one big fell swoop? Have we done a pilot to prove all these capabilities out? So as I'm talking here and kind of rambling on, you can see there's a lot of complexity in how we make the process change, how we time it in, how we phase it in, what are the different types of processes that might be impacted when we consider all this in aggregate. So that's a whole area. And just from the conversation there, you can imagine that now becomes very complex. This is not a trivial, let's just look at this one merchant and see how that impacts them and let the technology do it. It saves them 10 hours a week. Done. No, way more complicated than that. And you can imagine that's why this is a bottleneck, needs to really be carefully considered when it's in aggregate, and arguably one of the most important processes that a retailer does. So that in and of itself is a project, and there would be specialists out in the market, consultants and consulting firms who are specialists in process re-engineering. I mean, that could be a several month, could be a 1 year long initiative to transform the processes and how we phase it in, test it, trial it, and work on all the change issues associated with that. So that's one set of change. Then along with that comes the job role. How do the job roles of the people involved change? So now if we're, let's say, typically from working with our retail folks, their job roles are, 40 to 60% is involved in this kind of promotional planning work. Now, if we're automating some portion of that 40 to 60%, what is that? Now we need to redefine that job role. So now if we're eliminating tasks, we're adding a few, become a reviewer approver, exception handler, right? Because the human being is always the boss of the AI. So that category manager is still the boss of the AI, and they're now becoming a reviewer and approver. And the goal is, what can we be doing? What else are they now doing in addition to the tasks? We took away some of those tasks, and now we can say, what are the other tasks that that person can do that we can imagine? And I think we can now get into the more strategic. If you recall in one of the earlier talks about, the human is the strategist and the AI takes care of the gory details. So now I think this is where we can add some more strategic, really high value added tasks that people are capable of. This would be maybe spending more time with your vendors, the ones you buy the products for, talking about new product innovation. What are some of the new products coming to market? Talking about new ways, new marketing promotions or campaigns, new ways to excite consumers, coming up with new ways to service consumers. I think working on those aspects of strategy, spending more time measuring the business results. Are we achieving the results? What's the business strategy? I think evaluating strategy and tactics, measurement. I think all of these other things are high value added tasks, and I'm sure folks in the industry can imagine many other value added tasks that people can take care of. So again, defining a job role. Again, there's a whole range of consultants out in the marketplace who are experts at that. This, I guess, would fall into the area of HR, human resources consulting, defining the job roles, and again, reimagining the job role and how those job roles interact with the business process. Now, I talked about the tactical planning processes. If we're adding new strategic tasks to the human beings and the people who do these jobs, what are those strategic planning processes? Because the job role would have an impact on a set of processes, not just the original premise that I talked about, the planning process. So in aggregate, it could impact more than one business process. It could impact tactical day-to-day processes, more strategic processes, annual planning processes. So again, the process and human side of it go together. And I think, there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out there again. So speaking to the complexity of this is a significant transformation initiative as well, right? And then I'd say the third area, business process, human job role, and then talking about compensation. Well, now that you've changed the job role, how do you compensate for that job role? How do you measure that job role? So two levels of compensation. One would be, does the skill set of the job role change because you've changed the tasks? Is this something that you need to provide additional training for the people doing the job today? Or in the future, if you're transitioning to bring in more people, are you hiring a different type of person for the job role? Maybe a bit of both, training for the people in the job today if there's new tasks that are new to them that they maybe don't have capability for, new hiring practices to hire a different set of qualifications for the job. And because of those qualification changes, there may be base compensation changes. Is the job reclassified? Typically, companies have levels of job, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say, and each job level has a different salary band or salary range. So does the qualifications for the job change the leveling of the job, which would change compensation ranges? Is the performance management, so the bonus consideration, are we changing how we measure the job now? And I know Daisy is all about the halo. We're not focused just on category sales and retail, but on the total company impact, because one category could impact many categories. And historically, these category managers were compensated on their category. And so now that we may be impacting the total store, are we changing the compensation for the merchants to be around, again, category managed to be a different measurement. So not just only the category, it could be a blend of category plus total store. And so the compensation becomes a bit of base salary leveling, as well as how we measure the performance of the job and how do we assign performance management metrics, because obviously we would want the performance management and metrics associated with that to be aligned with the process changes and the job role changes. So all of this goes together. It's all integrated. So this imagining this transformation becomes process re-engineering experts, becomes HR consultant experts who do job roles, compensation experts. And again, all of these disciplines need to work together because all of this change works together. Again, technology experts to work together to figure out where exactly does a technology fit. And so this needs to be a collaboration of all four of those groups, as well as the people who do the job today. So imagine really 5 levels of expertise, maybe 6 if you include the management of the company. So the people doing the work today, the process engineering consultants, the HR consultants, the technology people who are bringing the technology to the table, and levels of management within the company. Those are the 5 constituents who need to work together. So as I describe this, you can see that this is a very complex undertaking, not to be lightly considered. And although the hype of the technology is real in many respects, it needs to be tempered by the reality of all of these change considerations that need to take place. And why I talked earlier about the need to spend more time spent on the change conversation than just purely the technology. Because I would say in some regards, the change conversation is a more complex. I think human dynamics are more complex than technology. Technology is fairly black and white. It either works or it doesn't, and it's very quantitative and logical. But I think the human element is a lot more complex when there's human relationships involved. So I would say in my opinion, the human change management is more complex than the technology itself. And I think that's why we need to spend a lot of time carefully considering this. And we want to, as I said, positively impact humanity, not negatively impact humanity. If I was to describe the change in insurance briefly, insurance, you go to the dentist, you get some procedures done. Maybe you're going for an annual checkup, or you're getting a filling, or getting x-rays or something like that. So when you go in, your dentist submits all the procedures they did to you, to your insurance company, to your healthcare provider, which could be provided through your work. And typically you would be automatically reimbursed. You don't have to upfront put any money. Some plans, the employee would have to pay the dentist out of pocket, and then you get reimbursed behind the scenes from the insurance plan, or a combination of both, because not all plans cover all activities. So behind the scenes, the claim is submitted from the dentist, or you submit it yourself as the employee. You submit it back to the insurance company. Well, a lot of work happens at the insurance company. The claim gets analyzed. It's a very straightforward claim. The technology could just simply process that. But if there's now a fraud detection AI capability involved, the fraud detection capability might go, oh, this claim looks suspicious. Alert, alert, alert. And they would now surface that up to a person, typically an investigator. There's a special investigations unit inside insurance companies who would review alerts to say, is this claim worth looking at? In healthcare, because the volume of claims are so high, because we all go to the dentist, at least once a year, hopefully twice a year. We go see our doctor once a year if we're just normal checkups. If you have some acute scenarios, you may go to the doctor, and dentist, several times a year. You might see your massage therapist, chiro, physio. If you add up all of that activity, it could be, more than a dozen trips a year. Whereas if you're thinking of auto insurance, hopefully you have no auto insurance claims at all. You might in the whole life of a policy have no claims at all, and the average person will have far less than 1 claim per year. Whereas in healthcare, you might have a dozen claims per year. So the volume of alerts generated in healthcare is substantially more if you're looking at the claim level. So because there's so many claims in healthcare, a lot of insurance companies don't investigate individual claims. And also when you go to the dentist to get your teeth cleaned, it might be $100 claim. And, that's not worth the time of an expensive investigator to go look at a single $100 claim. If the recovery on that is only a small percentage, it's not worth the time. So, in the healthcare industry, the investigators typically investigate people. They aggregate all their claims up. Could be they're investigating the dentist. And so when you aggregate the dentist, hundreds of patients times dozens of claims, you're now looking at thousands of claims at the dentist level or the massage therapist level, or you could aggregate it up to a clinic where you'd have multiple specialties and you'd have maybe tens of thousands of claims. So that's how investigation is done. But now if we have the ability, the technology can go analyze at the individual claim level and say, hey, this claim has some element of fraud or abuse. And my favorite dental example is always if you get charged an emergency visit for a teeth cleaning. It's not an emergency to get your teeth cleaned, but an emergency visit sometimes costs more than a regular visit. So in that case, it's a $20 difference, perhaps in something like that in one of the provinces in Canada between a recall visit, emergency visit, and a regular exam. That $20 difference might not worth having a human being look at it and say, yes, let's manually change that. So this is where now the technology comes in and can automate that decision. Now the process changes. Well, if the people are only investigating at the level of people or clinics or families of people, they're not looking at individual claims. That's a big process change to now being looking at aggregations of claims to an individual claim. Does that warrant that special investigator is going to go look at that individual claim? Well, if you have thousands and thousands of claims a year, the average claim department might have 10 investigators, let's say, and 10 investigators can look at, let's say 10 claims a week and 500 claims a year. That means 5,000 claims is the limit of a 10 investigative team. I made those metrics up. It could be slightly more or less. But if you're looking at 100,000 claims a year that are alerted, now the team isn't big enough to look at those claims. Now the process changes. Do we let the technology automatically decide? Can we let it automatically recode that emergency visit to a recall visit and capture that $20 because we don't have enough people to go look at each of those claims, which is why we investigate at the clinic level or at the provider level or at the family level in the healthcare context. Or in an automobile insurance context, we're looking at a windshield claim. We get a lot of windshield claims. You get a stone chip on your windshield. It costs, a few $100s to replace the windshield. Again, is that worth the time of the investigator to look at versus a $20,000 car accident where there could be some damage to the car? There could be a medical injury to the occupants of the car. There could be liability with somebody at fault with respect to damage in the other vehicle. That's a much more complex scenario. Do I have time to let my investigators go look at the windshield claim or a simple scratch on the side of a rental car, which could be a few $100s of paint damage and buffing out a little dent? Again, that's a significant change to the process from going from looking at an aggregate dollar value complex claim at an aggregate level or an individual small dollar value not complex thing. Do we let the technology automate? So that could be a process change in how the process works and how all the technology internally to the company is now routed. What used to just automatically get paid, that recall exam gets automatically paid, or that emergency visit gets automatically paid. Nobody looks at it. The claim is routed per normal. Now that goes to the technology, gets recoded, gets now paid with a change. That's a process change, requires kind of process re-engineering, or a job change. Is there a job change? Do we hire a different level of people? Because I still don't trust the technology to do that on its own. The management might say, I want someone to look at it, but I don't need my special investigator to look at it. In fact, and this is a case where AI might create more jobs because it might be worth it. If I have 20,000 claims a year that are worth $20, that could be $400,000 a year worth of those recall emergency visit claims. That allows me to hire 2 people at $60,000 a year. That cost me $120,000 a year to go review all of those claims that are potentially saving me $400,000. There's a business case there now to let the technology make the automated recommendation and let those 2 new people go look at it. So I can capture most of that $400,000 savings with a combination of the technology making the recommendation and a lower cost, lower skilled person to look at it. And again, all these same considerations that I talked about: business process re-engineering, again, having a new job role put in place. Again, all of the transformation, what's the compensation for this job? Again, all those same considerations that I talked about in the retail example. A little harder to relate to because, this is inside. We don't normally as consumers see the inner workings of an insurance company, but these same considerations need to be played out different context, and that there could be new jobs created for some of these lower cost administrative checks where there is a business case, because today the insurance companies may be paying more than they should. There's still a cost recovery case to be made to maybe hire some less skilled folks than your highly experienced investigators, adjusters, and underwriters. So we can see, hopefully I painted out a picture of what the future could look like and the considerations that need to be made. I didn't give you an answer of what it could look like. I think each company needs to answer this for themselves, but these are definitely three areas that need to be considered in detail: process change, job role change, which could lead to training, requalification, compensation, all of that, and purely compensation look. So big implications when you consider it in aggregate, going from hundreds, impacting hundreds of people in your organization. These are non-trivial changes, which I would argue are an order of magnitude more complex than the technology change itself. So I'll leave that for your consideration. Hopefully that gives you more food for thought on some of the gory details of change and why I think it is the hidden bottleneck that no one's talking enough about yet, because these human considerations are much more complex and I think much more important, because we don't want to impact people's lives without carefully considering what impact we're going to have, because those impact we have on our people and our employees. I think every company and every senior management team knows that the most valuable thing about our companies are the people that work within them. Without the people working within our companies, we would have no successful businesses. And so any changes that impact the people in our companies need to be carefully and thoughtfully considered out. And I think that's why we need these big transformation initiatives and need to figure out how to do this. And I think a lot of work needs to be spent on figuring out how to make these changes industry by industry. There'll be nuances in every industry, as I described, between retail and insurance. And I think the companies that figure out how to make these changes will be the ones that successfully adopt AI. And hopefully, we can engage together in some of these conversations. And we're trying to have these with our customers today at Daisy. Our mission statement is that, computing machines should improve all of our lives, employees as well as our consumers. And we want to elevate the role of people in business processes by letting computers take care of the gory technology. And if we do this, we'll have a positive financial impact on the businesses. And this financial impact will be driven by improved customer satisfaction. Customers will have a better experience. They'll get faster service. They'll get lower cost services. Employees will have a better job experience. And I think we can imagine this future together by working on this. One of the motivations for this podcast is around the more we can share about AI, the less scary it becomes. And I'm hoping when I talk about these job role changes and the impact on people, the fact that we can talk about it makes it more explicit and transparent. It becomes less scary, right? And I think that's the whole point. The more we understand about the technology itself and its capabilities, the more we understand about the challenge and implementation, I think the less scary it becomes when we realize that a lot of these things we've worked on, the change management things I talked about, are things we've done before. This is not new. We have a lot of experience in change management. The technology is new. The processes might be slightly different and new, but I think we have a lot of experience and it's less scary. And so I think the more we talk about it, the less fearful all of us will become, and the more progress we can make together, because we can realize that, hey, we have a lot of this experience and know-how already. And I think that's why it's important to talk in transparent ways, both to people who are experts in the field as well, and more importantly, to lay people who are not experts, to allay everyone's fears, because I don't think it is as scary as the world makes it out to be. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we can allay everyone's fears. Thanks again for tuning in. And as always, please check out YouTube and Spotify where these videos are. Like them, ask questions, and if you have an opinion, you differ or you agree, you want to get on and chat to me about it, would love to record some sessions with some folks who have expertise in these areas and have a good conversation. Thanks so much for tuning in.